Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Well, the whole world has been on pause for 18 months or so, it seems. The only thing that people have been talking about is COVID, not so much the virus, but the lockdown and the lockdownism, how it's changed so much of our lives. Where once masks were optional, now you're a double masker or you hate grandma. Now you're a double vaxxer or you hate grandma. Now I hear triple vaxxing is in vogue, even though it doesn't help. Vaccine passports are on the way. We saw signs the other day popping up in airports across Canada for separate, segregated lines, depending on your private medical details. I don't think we're going to be out of it anytime soon. But as the panic, I think, is replaced in some people's minds with skepticism and hesitation to believe the public health deep state, other issues are reemerging. And we see, for example, how Alberta once again gets the short end of the stick. The latest insult was Justin Trudeau appointing a Liberal patronage appointment to the Senate on behalf of Albertans, mere months away from when that province has scheduled a province-wide Senate election. Let me say that again. Although appointing senators is the prerogative of the federal government, the government of Alberta has for decades now held Senate elections. Trudeau, seeing that, went ahead and basically said, I don't care about your election. I'm going to appoint my patronage appointee. And what are you going to even do about it? That's a really good question, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Because when the question is put to Quebec, what are you going to do about it? They have an answer. A perpetual revolutionary party called the Bloc Québécois and its provincial wing, the Parti Québécois. And if you doubt them, well, they've held 2 referenda. What can Alberta do to be treated seriously and not just laughed at? Well, the new book has some of the answers. The book is called Moment of Truth: How to Think About Alberta's Future. And I really like the cover. It's a signpost with different signs. Go it alone. 51st state. Let them freeze. Roll over. Pipelines are bust. Build firewall. It's edited by Jack Mintz, Ted Morton, and Dr. Tom Flanagan, who joins us now via Skype from Calgary. Dr. Tom, great to see you again. You were one of my professors when I went to University of Calgary many years ago. The things we talked about back then, Western alienation, the Reform Party, are things we would talk about now. COVID has drowned them out, but all those same issues, those systemic issues, those problems with Confederation, none of them have been fixed, have they?
No, and that's really disappointing because it seemed that our generation was making a lot of progress on that with the foundation of the Reform Party and eventually getting to the point of a national party which could run the government. And we did make progress in that period of time, but it's all been pretty much lost. The Senate is just one example of a Alberta idea, which has now been rejected by the Eastern establishment. But lots of other things too. The development of the Alberta energy industry has been blockaded by Liberal government. You can go down the line of reforms that have been proposed in Alberta, and they appeared to work temporarily, but in the longer term, they've been beaten back. And that's the setting for this book. Where do we go now? What are the options for Alberta?
Yeah, I mean, the Senate election in many ways is the least important. It's just symbolic. I mean, the election itself was non-binding, really. Trudeau could appoint anyone he wants under the Constitution, but just the ease and casualness with which he stuffed that seat in the middle of a campaign, I think shows the temperature. I mean, if a guy can kill the Northern Gateway Pipeline, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the Energy East Pipeline, if he can kill multi-billion-dollar projects and throw tens of thousands of people out of work, obviously he'll think nothing of a symbolic slight. Because, seriously, what are you going to do about it? And let me put that to you.
Yeah.
What could Alberta possibly do if it got really mad?
Well, that's right. And we canvass some of the possibilities in the book. And of course, one possibility is an outright separatist movement. I guess the editors of the book And most of the authors are not really ready for that, although a couple of the authors, this is a collection of essays, and a couple of the authors do assume a separatist viewpoint. But I guess most of us are willing to try some tactics that haven't yet been tried. One is the upcoming referendum on equalization. It's been talked about for 20 years or more, ever since the publication of the so-called firewall letter, but hasn't actually been tried. Well, it will be tried this fall. There's a Supreme Court decision which says that if a province requests constitutional discussion on something, other provinces in Ottawa are bound to at least come to the table and discuss it. So that's the point of the referendum on equalization, is to provoke a constitutional discussion showing how unfair this program is to Alberta, and demanding some change into it. Now, will it succeed? I don't know, but it's at least it's a step forward that hasn't been tried yet. Another step that could be considered would be creation of Alberta-only programs like Alberta Pension Plan, which again is an idea that goes back to the firewall letter. There are some good economic arguments in favor of it, but COVID has made everybody, kind of afraid of everything, and so COVID has really dampened our timetable, I would say. But those are the kind of ideas that you'll find in the book: is what can we do? Founding a Western party didn't work out. Well, it worked for a while, I'm say it was great while it lasted, but in the longer run, it's been kind of swallowed up by the system.
Yeah. Well, I'm really impressed by the quality of authors and scholars who have written these essays. Like it's a compendium of views. I mean, Preston Manning writes the first essay, Ted Morton's in there, Donald Savoy, Derek Burney, Barry Cooper, David Berkison. Like these are not wild-eyed, populist rabble-rousers. I mean, maybe they are. Maybe they would call themselves that as a point of pride. I don't say that as an insult, but I mean, these are PhDs. These are nationally known economists. These are people who have been around for decades and have had. So, maybe you'd call yourself a wild-eyed man, and maybe a couple others were. But kidding aside, this is a serious treatment. I think this is the first serious treatment of what happens if it doesn't work. And I think this perhaps normalizes a conversation where separatism has to be an option. The reason I say that is, if there's no or else, you'll never win a negotiation. I mean, Donald Trump had many flaws, but one of his great strengths is he knew how to negotiate. And the first thing you have to be able to do is walk away from the table, walk away from a bad deal. There has to be an or else. And I don't think Alberta has ever had the or else. There was very briefly, Peter Lougheed toyed with maybe turning off the taps. But I don't even know if the East would care anymore. I don't know. I mean, I'm excited about this book, but it's only a very first step, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And thank you for pointing out the quality of the contributors. I think Jack Mintz, the book was his idea, and he recruited many of the contributors. Jack has now become, I would say, the leading economic commentator in Canada today on our public policy. And some of the other people are absolutely top drawer, like Derek Burney. Derek was ambassador to the United States. He was chief of staff for the Prime Minister, for Prime Minister Mulroney. I mean, this is a guy who really knows his way around government. And Derek has a striking statement in his chapter. He says, if Alberta continues to be kicked around as it is now, separatism is a completely understandable response. These are my words, not his, but that's the sentiment of it. So, these are some top flight people in this book, and very serious thinkers. So where will it go? It's, as I say, you're right. It's the first step, and that's the way we envisioned it, is to give people something to think about, put some ideas on the table. We are writers and scholars. We obviously aren't going to do this ourselves. Our role is to bring ideas to the surface, but see what the political leaders can come up with. Your point about having a threat, I think it's important, and one disappointment for me was the way that Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, who's a good friend and I support, but he's gone out of his way to repeatedly say that separatism is not an option. We won't even talk about it, and I think that takes away the threat right at the beginning. And I think you do need that threat, even if you don't talk about it all the time. I think you need it in the background. So anyway, we're at the very early stages here, and COVID has scrambled everything. But I believe we will get back more or less to normal eventually. And these issues are going to come back because this is a perennial problem for Alberta of being exploited by Eastern Canada, where it's all actually very simple when you come right down to it. The votes are in Eastern Canada. The resource wealth is in Alberta, to some extent other Western provinces. And it's a very big temptation for politicians to cater to the votes and appropriate the resource wealth, and it can be a winning political strategy for long periods of time until sometimes the effects become so bad that it has to be suspended. But it keeps coming back because it works. So Donald Savoy, and he's one of the top political scientists in Canada, perhaps considered the leading expert on Canadian political institutions. He's from the Maritimes, not a Westerner, but he's got a powerful analysis in that book of how Canadian political institutions are systematically rigged to favor population majorities in central Canada.
Yeah. The book's called Moment of Truth, How to Think About Alberta's Future. I like this line on the back, part brainstorm, part blueprint, and part rallying cry. I think that's true. I'm glad you mentioned Jason Kenney, and I've known him for ages too. We were part of the snack pack together.
Yeah, I remember those days.
Who went out with Preston Manning. I mean, Manning, he rose in response to the first wave of Western separatism. I think some folks forget that the Separatist Party actually elected an MLA in Alberta in a by-election. Preston Manning said, no, the West wants in. It was his counterpoint to separatists, said, no, let's reform it. We want to stay in. Let's be the do-gooders. Let's be so naively idealistic, and our sheer good faith will win over the kleptocrats out east. And, we'll accomplish through love what these separatists can't do through ferocity. I don't think that succeeded. Stephen Harper, I think, ameliorated a lot of these problems just by, being less hostile to the West and making it more Western friendly. He was helped by a few other things, including, strong oil prices. He just didn't get in the way. But here's the thing about Jason Kenney. I think, and I like the guy too, although I think he's been heavy-handed during the lockdown. I think he wants to run for prime minister. I think he wants perhaps to be reelected as Alberta premier. He's still young, very early 50s. Finish up Alberta well. He's had a disastrous year and a half. And then run for federal office. And so everything he's saying and doing in Alberta as regards the federal government, I think part of his brain is thinking, how will this sound in 5 years when I'm running to be prime minister? So I can't say anything that would even have a whiff of separatism or even alienation or even, so I think that he's not fully dedicated to the present task of representing Alberta or the West, because he's got his eye on that main chance later when Aaron O'Toole fails. Will he come in and take that job? That's my hunch. I have no basis for that other than speculation.
Well, you may be right. I don't have any information on Jason's mind, so I can't say, but it's certainly a plausible explanation. But I've worked for politicians for a long time, associated with them, and so I don't expect perfection. I just look for some movement in the direction that I think is necessary, and we can criticize what Jason has done, but he is, in fact, holding the referendum on equalization, which is can be a first step towards Alberta's self-assertion. So I'm willing to, take that in good faith and see what comes from that. Now, I am a little concerned that up to this point, the government hasn't really made much of a case in the public mind for why it's holding this referendum. They've allowed opponents to define it thus far. I can't tell you how many times I've heard talking heads say this referendum is pointless because equalization is is a matter of federal legislation, which is true, but that's only the beginning of the story. It's based in the Constitution. There's possibility for discussing the terms of it and so on. But the government hasn't been very aggressive in utilizing this opportunity. So we're going to have to see what happens. It's an opportunity, and what will the government make of it? I hope they make something. Can't say for sure until we see it.
I'm not going to ask you to predict the future, but I'm going to ask you to tell our viewers, if you wouldn't mind answering this, which you think is the best future. So not which you predict will be done, but if Alberta wanted to move away from the word no pipeline, no oil sands, no freedom, no, and if it wanted to, I don't know, to borrow a phrase, have some self-determination, do you think staying in Canada and making the case like Preston Manning did, if that's option one? Option two, trying to become the 51st state, maybe set off against Puerto Rico, add 2 more stars, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat to the flag. Or option three, trying to be some sort of independent country. Which of those 3 alternatives do you think would allow Albertans to live their best life, as the kids say? Staying in Canada, trying to reform it, joining America as a 51st state, or trying some sort of independence?
Well, you asked what would be the best option for Alberta, not what I think will happen necessarily, but what would be the best. Well, the best option, I think, pretty clearly would be remaining in Canada, which has many great assets and virtues, and assuming our proper role in Canada and getting a government which is not constantly trying to block us. Now, we thought that might be possible for a while. Can that be done? I guess as a step towards that, some of us are proposing these, you might call independent, what's the right word? Autonomism, I guess, is the word we use. We're proposing these autonomous alternatives that make Alberta more self-reliant but still within Confederation. There are big, huge problems involved in trying to join the United States. I'm not sure that we'd be welcome as long as the Democrats are in power. And the problems in the United States are, I would say at least as big as those in Canada. And as being a sovereign state, well, yeah, it has a certain attraction, but we would be landlocked. And so we would still have big transit problems to work out. We're worried about our access to tidewater and so forth. Well, that doesn't go away just with a declaration of sovereignty. So, the ideal solution would be a better version of Canada, which recognizes Alberta's ambitions and doesn't treat Alberta just as a golden goose. Can we achieve that? I don't know. It's depressed. The record is depressing. I have to say that many of the authors, sort of my generation, people who are now in their 70s and spent many years working for the reform of Canada in various political movements, whether it was a Reform Party or the Canadian Alliance, the Conservative Party of Canada, or some of the provincial parties, other national parties. We were all kind of rowing the same way, and thought we had made progress, and seeing it all undone in the last few years, it's been very, very depressing. And that's the mood behind this book. We wouldn't, 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, we wouldn't have written the book this way. But we've seen so much lost since 2015 with the blockade, obstruction of pipelines, and attacks on our basic industries. So that's the mood behind this book. But for me, still, reform of Canada would be the best outcome. Others say, "Look, Tom, you're just naive. It can't be done," and they're turning in a more separatist direction, and I respect that. And maybe that could be the spur to some meaningful negotiations. If Jay Hill can get some results with his Maverick Party and make it seem like a real force, that might lead to some change too. I mean, you're absolutely right when you said about Quebec that all their political gains, which are enormous, have been made with the threat of separatism in the background. There was always that fear, Yeah.
To improve things within Canada, the template of Quebec shows you need to have a credible threat to leave Canada. I suppose it's like a bad marriage. The threat to leave, the threat of a divorce, might focus the mind of the other party to improve the marriage itself. I'm trying to use an analogy. Dr. Tom, I was just thinking, when I first met you at the University of Calgary, I was a teenager, and these same issues were being described. I am 49 now, and I'm not sure what progress has been made on these files. The book is called Moment of Truth, How to Think About Alberta's Future. We'll have a link below this video that you can click to get a copy. Great to see you again, and look forward to meeting up perhaps next time I'm in Calgary. Thanks for your time today.
Okay, Ezra, thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure. There you have it, Dr. Tom Flanagan, who was one of the editors of the book, Moment of Truth. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.